What would you do if the ground beneath your feet hid the screams of the living? In 1823, Virginia witnessed one of the most horrifying acts in plantation history. A master, drunk with power, forced his slaves into the earth, not in death but alive. And what happened that night is a story history tried to bury with them. Virginia, 1823. Plantations dotted the countryside, their wealth built on the backs of enslaved men and women. To outsiders, the rolling fields looked peaceful. But within the walls of certain plantations, horrors unfolded that no one dared to speak aloud. One such place belonged to Master Elijah Harrow, a man both feared and whispered about in hushed tones. A cruel overseer, his punishments went beyond the whip. He believed that true control meant crushing not just the body but the soul. According to whispers passed through generations, Elijah discovered a new way to instill terror. Whenever enslaved people disobeyed, or worse attempted to flee, he would not just punish them. He would bury them alive. Imagine the horror, a shallow grave dug beneath the moonlight. The cries of men and women forced down into the dirt, their fingernails clawing at the soil as earth rained down over their faces. Some suffocated within hours. Others, it is said, screamed until their voices faded into silence. The most infamous event took place in the summer of 1823. That night, two enslaved men, Daniel and Isaac, attempted to escape. They had planned their flight for weeks, gathering scraps of food, studying the stars, dreaming of freedom in the north. But Elijah caught them before they could cross the river. And instead of whipping them, he decided to make an example so terrifying that no one on his plantation would ever dream of running again. Elijah ordered his overseers to dig 2 large pits at the edge of the plantation. The enslaved community was forced to gather, watching in horror as Daniel and Isaac were bound, gagged, and lowered into the earth. Elijah stood above the graves, his lantern flickering across his cruel smile. He reportedly said, "If you seek freedom in the skies, I'll give you freedom in the ground." As the soil was shoveled over them, the enslaved cried out, their voices breaking into screams. Mothers covered their children's eyes, but nothing could cover their ears. That night, the enslaved quarters were silent. No songs, no whispers, only the memory of muffled screams rising from the earth. Some claimed the cries went on until dawn. Others said the sound of scratching could still be heard near the burial site for days afterward. And the most chilling detail? Weeks later, a field hand reported seeing fingernail marks inside the walls of the pit when heavy rains washed the soil aside. Backhand index pointing right. Imagine standing there, forced to watch your friends buried alive, knowing that speaking out could mean you'd be next. What would you do? Would you stay silent to survive or risk everything to fight back? But Elijah's cruelty did not go unpunished. Soon after, strange things began to happen on the plantation. At night, workers claimed they heard voices, low moans, whispers rising from the ground. Tools went missing, crops withered, and livestock refused to go near the burial site. Even Elijah himself began to unravel. Servants whispered that he would wake screaming in the night, dirt under his fingernails as though he had clawed the earth in his sleep. The plantation had become more than a place of labor. It had become a graveyard with restless souls. But what happened in the months after 1823 would prove that the dead, or those buried alive, do not rest quietly. Elijah Harrow would learn that when you bury the innocent, the earth itself remembers. The burial of Daniel and Isaac was not the end. It was the beginning of something far darker. Because in the months after 1823, the plantation became a place where whispers turned to screams, and where Elijah Harrow would face the horror he created. By autumn, Elijah was a different man. Neighbors reported that his once proud figure had withered. He drank constantly, muttering of shadows that followed him. Workers claimed he avoided the fields at night, terrified of the soil shifting beneath his feet. He insisted the graves had moved. That sometimes in the dark he saw hands breaking through the dirt. One night, an enslaved child ran screaming into the quarters. She swore she saw Daniel, his face pale, his eyes hollow, standing at the edge of the field. Isaac was beside him, clutching his chest, his mouth open in a silent scream. Others laughed it off as nightmares. But within weeks, more sightings came. And each time, the visions were closer, to the master's house. By December of 1823, Elijah no longer left his bedroom. He boarded his windows, ordered food left at the door, and whispered prayers in the dead of night. When his servants finally entered the room, they found Elijah dead. His face was twisted in terror, his hands clutched at his chest, his fingernails cracked and bleeding, as though he had been clawing at invisible earth. After his death, the plantation fell into ruin. No one would buy it, fearing the land itself was cursed. The graves of Daniel and Isaac remained untouched, and locals avoided the site entirely. To this day, in certain corners of Virginia, people whisper of the Harrow plantation. They say that on summer nights, when the air is still, you can hear muffled cries rising from the ground. Some even claim the soil shifts beneath your feet, as though something below still struggles to escape. The story of Elijah Harrow is not just about one man's cruelty. It is a reminder of how slavery twisted humanity into something unrecognizable. It is about how unchecked power, combined with inhumanity, can lead to atrocities so horrific that even the earth refuses to forget them. And it is a warning that history holds countless secrets buried deep, waiting to be uncovered. Backhand index pointing right. Do you believe the earth remembers the cries of the suffering? Backhand index pointing right. If you walked across the Harrow plantation today, would you dare to stand on the graves? Or would fear keep you away? This was the horrifying untold story of Elijah Harrow and the slaves he buried alive in Virginia, 1823, a chapter of slavery so terrifying that history itself tried to silence it. If this story shocked you, thumbs up like this video to keep these hidden histories alive. Speech balloon comment below. Would you have stood against Elijah, or stayed silent out of fear? Bell subscribe for more dark, forgotten stories from America's past. Because the ground may hide the bodies, but the truth always rises.